Welcome to Mudwalkers. Today we're going to be finding out who the who is in Genesis 3:11. Stick around. I've been reading up on Christian Naturism for going on 13 years now. So obviously Genesis chapter 3 is in my thought life a lot, and I read about it a lot. It's kind of the nexus point where a lot of this stuff ends up being discussed. So the who question, very important. I've heard the question of who is Yahweh referring to in 3:11 a lot of times. And a great many times I've heard people conclude, somewhat dogmatically, that the who here is the serpent. But let's look at all the options we have available to us in the grammar of the verse, because I think I've actually heard a lot of people omit a viable option in the grammar here. In Genesis chapter 3, Adam and Eve famously eat from the forbidden fruit, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then Yahweh shows up in the garden, and they go and hide from him, and then Adam comes out and says, "Ooh, I was scared," and Yahweh says, "Who told you you were naked?" Well, who is this who?
A town known as Whoville, for there lived the Whos.
There are actually 5 possible answers as far as I can tell. In case you haven't noticed, my voice is a little bit off. My toddler coughed right in my mouth a couple weeks ago, and I've had his cough ever since. This is life with kids. It's just you get sick a lot more than you did before you were a parent. So I think my voice is finally recovered enough to record a video, but if you notice that I sound a bit hoarse, that's why. Okay, so the 5 options here. Adam really could look back at Yahweh and say, "Well, you told me I was naked." This one immediately falls flat because I think it's pretty clear that Adam and Yahweh both already know that Yahweh didn't say that. That actually seems to be the entire point of Yahweh's question in the first place, but maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Option number 2, he could just say, "I told myself I was naked." This one's a bit silly, but grammatically it is one viable answer to the question. Option number 3, Eve told me I was naked. Again, it's an option. Option number 4, the serpent told me I was naked. Which again, we've heard before. And finally, option number 5, nobody told me I was naked.
My name is nobody, nobody, nobody.
The nobody and myself options are really similar because if he says nobody, then doesn't that already mean that Adam kind of already reached this conclusion on his own? So nobody and myself are almost the same answer, but grammatically they're different options. This is my Patreon dance. This episode of Mudwalkers is brought to you by Patreon. These guys are my patrons. They're making the channel happen. They're making my work sustainable, and I just gouged my foot with a stick. Also, I have a website, nakedmeanshuman.com. You can sign up for our newsletter over there. You get access to all my content over there as well. All my mainline content. Over on Patreon though, you get early access to all my mainline content, videos like this one, but at the Mudwalker tier and above, you also get access to all my Patreon exclusive content like cooking vlogs, cooking videos, travel vlogs, resort tours, World Naked Bike Ride videos, stuff like that, and our quality content. But you also, at the Mudwalker tier and above, get access to our monthly Zoom call, a great time for us to get together, share stories, swap ideas, and in general, hang out and have fun. Patreon is awesome. I love the social aspect of it. I'm getting to meet a lot of interesting people, and obviously it makes my world go round. It paid for what you see before you and what is sitting behind the camera right now. So without further ado, let's get back into the video. The answer I've usually heard from Christian naturists on who the who is, who the who the who the who is, who the who the who the who is, the who the who the who the who the who the who is.
You're weird. Nah, nope.
The answer I've usually heard is that the only possible answer here is the serpent, right? I mean, because there's only 4 people in the story, and obviously it wasn't God or Adam or Eve, so it has to be the serpent. It's definitely the serpent. But does the text really say that? To be clear.
Let me be clear.
To be clear, I don't have a problem with supposing that the serpent might have been the one to say it. I don't have a problem with speculation. What I have a problem with is speculative claims that are uttered with dogma and conviction, with the expectation that the other person must now believe it because the text somehow like implies it, maybe? But implication is not enough for dogma, especially when nobody is an equally valid answer to the question. That, plus the fact that the text doesn't explicitly answer this question, means that we can't be 100% sure about the serpent's role or lack thereof in the declaration of Adam and Eve as being naked. If someone asks me who planted this weed in my backyard, I mean, there are a few viable answers, but the one I'm going to give is, well, nobody. There wasn't some person that came along and took a little seed and planted it there. It's just that that's how nature works. Nobody planted that.
Nobody.
It just happened. Oh, who threw that little sphere of ice at my head? Nobody. It just came out of the clouds. Who put that trampoline on my roof? Nobody. It was a tornado. Part of the reason that I take the nobody option over the serpent is because Yahweh's question here seems to be rhetorical in nature, and it seems to be less about actually getting data from Adam and Eve and more about reminding them that he's not the source of the information that Adam is spouting. That conclusion didn't come from me, so where did you get it? And then he never actually lets them answer the question, he just moves on, which is very interesting. Now, I didn't come up with that conclusion myself. I got that from the Bema Discipleship podcast. You can find a link to that episode of that podcast down below. It's a great podcast looking at the Bible from a sort of Messianic Jewish perspective, bringing a lot of Jewish thought and culture from the ancient world, obviously, into our understanding of the text, which I think is vital in understanding a lot of the issues that go into clothing, modesty, and nakedness in the Bible. So I think the question is rhetorical. It would be kind of like if I caught one of my kids with his hand in the cookie jar, and he goes, and I'm standing there going, and I say, who told you could have a cookie? And he could look over his shoulder and he could say, nobody.
No.
That's a valid answer to the question. The whole point of me asking is not for him to inform me what person told you that, but is to remind him, none of your authority figures, me or your mother, told you could have a cookie. But I'm saying that in the form of a question as the authority. But a second interesting point here is that Yahweh himself seems to sort of answer the question himself in what he says immediately after the question. Because he asks them the initial rhetorical question, who told you that you were naked? But then he continues with, did you eat from the tree that I forbade you to eat from? So the rhetorical question is about the source of Adam's conclusion. And then Yahweh goes, is it the tree? Is that the source of this conclusion? Because he points out first, who told you you were naked? Not me. And then he says, it was the tree, wasn't it? Essentially. That is the nobody option because trees aren't people. And notice, I'm saying seems, I'm saying think, I'm saying maybe, because this is all speculation. The points of these questions are not explicitly stated in the text, so I can't be sure about what exactly he meant by the rhetorical questions. These seem like the things he was getting at, so I'm comfortable saying these are probable conclusions, but I'm not going to be dogmatic about his point because he doesn't state it. I'm looking at what the text says, making speculative conclusions based on what I think is probable, and I'm going to let you make your own decision, draw your own conclusion based on the data that I've presented, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you dogmatically that something is definitely true about this story when the text doesn't state it. And I think the biggest problem with the serpent is the who interpretation. is that it damages our credibility. Not only is it making a dogma out of a speculation, which is already iffy, but it damages our credibility as a movement to make such a dogmatic claim based on speculations. If a Christian textile is looking into these issues, the Bible, clothing, modesty, nakedness, naturism, for the first time, and he's trying to get a bead on what biblical interpretation looks like for Christian naturists, and the first thing he hears out of a naturist's mouth is, "It's definitely a serpent." If he knows anything about biblical interpretation, he's going to laugh at us, because that's a speculation, it's a speculative claim that's being put forth as dogma. That's really, really going to make us look bad in the eyes of Christian textiles who know anything about biblical interpretation. We can't be dogmatic about this. Now, maybe we can put it forward as a theory. I think that actually might be true. I think it might be true that Satan did actually tell them that. That maybe that's what explains them running off into the bushes. Maybe, but I'm not going to be dogmatic about it, yay or nay. But the credibility of our movement is very important if we want to mainstream it among Christian theology, Christian denominations, biblical interpreters, scholars, theologians, people like that. Our credibility matters in these questions, in these issues. So I'm not going to be dogmatic about it. And that Christian textile we mentioned before, who's trying to figure out what biblical interpretation looks like for Christian naturists, if he hears us making that kind of claim, he might just go, "Oh, these people don't know anything about interpreting the Bible. No wonder they're nudists. They just want to rationalize everything like they're rationalizing the serpent." To be clear, I'm not saying that Christian naturists are rationalizing their way into the serpent. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that that's a probable term that could get lobbed your way by a critic. I wouldn't call it rationalization myself. It's okay to speculate. It's okay to not be sure about things. Any person who's been in theology or biblical interpretation at any deep level for any period of time will tell you, yeah, there are lots of things that people can and should be. I'm not 100% sure about that issue. Maybe so, maybe not. I kind of lean this way myself, but the text doesn't really tell us much about that, so who knows, really? That's a very valid position to hold on things like these in matters of theology or other biblical issues. As naturists, the important thing for us in Genesis chapter 3 isn't the role of the serpent. It's the lack of a moral mandate, mandating clothing, or prohibiting nakedness. Without a mandate or a prohibition, the passage doesn't have any impact on whether or not we have to wear clothes. It's a completely separate issue. The passage becomes irrelevant. So the serpent, we don't really need the serpent to have this role or that role in order to defend naturism from Genesis chapter 3. But for the sake of the movement, let's not be terribly dogmatic about the serpent. Let's soften our language and say, probably, or I believe it's likely, or similarly high probability language that comes short of dogmatism. Dogmatism. Come on, boys. That comes short of dogmatism.
Do you speak any English?
Maybe you're right. Maybe the serpent did tell them they were naked. Maybe he is behind the whole fig leaf thing. Maybe he is behind them being afraid. Maybe he is behind them, having all these problems with their bodies and so on and so forth, and told them they were naked and have them believe they were naked. Maybe so. But maybe not. The text doesn't say that explicitly, so I can't hold to it dogmatically. You can't be sure. I can't be sure. None of us were there. Food for thought.